2, 1.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're live?
Yeah.
Perfect. Welcome to the Class Play After Show NFL Draft. Big day, one of the biggest days in the NFL year. So we've gathered here today, the Class Play podcast crew, to go late in the night and break down some of the biggest moments from the draft. As always, I have with me Tej Seth. Tej, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I figured people would be so amped up with an actual NFL event for the first time in a couple months here. So I think that people will not be sleeping and hopefully watching us tonight pretty caffeinated is what I'm expecting from our audience.
I agree. And Tej has also hopped up on a Lions trade up, Terry and Arnold. We'll get into that later. Ben, maybe more hopped up. A lot of stuff coming from the Vikings. Ben, just give us a general mood. How are you doing, man?
I mean, I'm doing okay. I think overall, obviously there were some ups and downs in the first round with the Vikings in general, but I thought Detroit put out as far as like a draft town, and kind of like Tej said, like this is kind of it from the NFL perspective until we get into training camp and the NFL, and the NFL like regular season cycle. So might as well dive in here for the rest of the night is all I can say.
For sure. And guys, as you know, one of the biggest things in the NFL draft is the quarterbacks. Some things went according to plan. Some things didn't go according to plan. One of the biggest surprises at number 8, the Atlanta Falcons, who have already signed Kirk Cousins to a multi-year deal, pick Michael Penix out of nowhere. Tej, what are some thoughts on that?
We had to talk about this first. I mean, this is the pick of the night. I think probably it'll lead every single talk show tomorrow morning, even trumping the Cowboys pick, which usually leads most talk shows when this talked about. But like, this is the stunner of the draft, like Eric mentioned on the broadcast. First off, pressure to sack rate for the win. We spent the whole draft cycle talking about pressure to sack rate. Michael Penix Jr. had the best pressure to sack rate in this class. And he was also someone who did a pretty good job of throwing the ball away when pressured, but he was the QB5 by grinding the mocks. He had a 25.2 expected draft position. So that's what was really surprising, was them taking him at 8 in a vacuum would have been pretty surprising on its own, but also considering how much guaranteed money they just gave Kirk Cousins, it'll be really interesting to see what the dynamic is between those two guys.
Yeah, and so, Ben, you're in the market for the quarterback. Vikings are sitting still. Number 8 hits, and it's Michael Penix Jr. What flashes through your mind, both from the analytical perspective and from the fan perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, from like a fan's perspective, like as a person who was very much interested in what happened with the first 3 quarterbacks and exactly how they went off the board, specifically Drake May, whether he went to the New England Patriots or was maybe, a part of a trade-up type scenario, like it did seem like the Michael Penix and the Bo Nix question of where they were like priced at from the betting market standpoint, very much borderline first round draft picks. So to see, Michael Penix, I did think in a lot of ways it opened up opportunities for the Minnesota Vikings to actually get a guy like JJ McCarthy at the 11th overall selection. So from a fan's perspective, although I was shocked, I did think it actually probably like benefited the Minnesota Vikings longer term in the fact that they at least had somebody available to them at the 11th selection. Of course, they ended up trading up to 10 and getting JJ McCarthy. But I think overall, I would say like the surprising thing to me from an analytics standpoint is something that, we talked about this entire draft cycle. We've talked about in previous draft cycles, and it has been the fact that some of these, the fringe 4 or 5 quarterback prospects, like they continuously do fall down draft boards. And this is really like the first time we've kind of seen, I would say, like the analytic movement where we are, all of us would very much say like we do overvalue the quarterback position. And we kind of saw that play out in the draft tonight, I would say. And I think that's maybe one of the bigger takeaways is like the league is very much, if you don't have a quarterback, there's no draft pick too great to actually go up and actually get a guy, I think. And I think that's maybe the main takeaway from both Michael Penix and the Bo Nix selection here in the first round tonight.
For sure. And especially given that it seemed we've been covering this class, we've been covering this draft since free agency combine. Throughout the whole offseason, we've been taking a look at it. And obviously, when the Falcons decided to go with Kirk Cousins, taking Kirk Cousins off of the Vikings team, signing him to a multi-year deal, right, the expectation was that, this was a team that was probably ready in their mind to compete. Now you add Penix to that. And this is the first time really since the Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love scenario where we have a, quarterback in waiting. Obviously, we also had that with Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes. Does this at all mirror that, Tej? Where do they go? I mean, Michael Penix is 24 years old now, and they have Cousins for at least 3-4 years. Tell us how you expect it to go now.
Right. I mean, I think you bring up a great point there where it is a little bit different than the Patrick Mahomes pick, than the Jordan Love pick, just because of Penix's age. And I think that there is not necessarily an immediate plan to move off of Kirk Cousins. When you look at his contract at over the cap, his signing bonus was $50 million prorated over 4 years. So you're going to be guaranteeing him $12.5 million in 2026 and in 2027. So even if you do move on from Cousins after 2025, there's still a decent amount of money you're spending at the quarterback position. You can't get the full rookie contract advantage out of it. I think that the Chiefs had a plan set up to move on from Alex Smith to Mahomes after 1 year, and they executed that pretty well. The Packers had a plan to move on from Aaron Rodgers when it looked like he was declining. He happened to have back-to-back MVP seasons after the Jordan Love pick, which kind of extended their timeline a little bit. But it will be really interesting to see if Michael Penix is becoming his first time as a full-time starter in the NFL at age 27, 28. We usually don't see that. I think Brandon Weeden would have been one of the only examples of someone who was a first-round pick that became a full-time starter at that age.
Yeah, and Ben, as a Vikings fan, there's reports coming out now that Kirk Cousins was, quote, stunned. You're a guy who's watched Kirk Cousins for years. Obviously, most football fans watched him in that QB1 series, kind of fell in love with him and his demeanor and leadership. Kind of talk through, you as a former Cousins follower, how you expect him to approach this. Do you think it's just business as usual and Captain Kirk takes it? Do you think that maybe we have a scenario like a Matt Flynn or Russell Wilson where Michael Penix comes in and just immediately snatches it away from a recently signed quarterback? What's going through your mind? What do you expect?
Yeah, the quirky nature of Kirk Cousins, I think, has very much won a lot more people over than what I would have expected before the QB series on Netflix. But just in general, for me, and I know the reports coming out of Kirk Cousins camp are very much going to be, as professional as possible, but also maybe as negative as they can possibly be from a public facing standpoint. And I think those are valid, especially because you look at, what Kirk Cousins signed here, 4-year deal, and he's still very much, needing to kind of win over the locker room, right? He's never really been in that building with all those guys to any sort of certain extent where he has the team around him. And now not only has that not happened yet, but they've already brought in his, heir apparent successor and everything else. And it's a situation where he didn't even really get a year to settle into this locker room, just is already kind of looking over his shoulder. So I think from my perspective, it is a situation that I can see making Kirk Cousins really uncomfortable. And I do think it signals a weird middle ground for the Atlanta Falcons and not really knowing if they kind of want to go all in around Kirk Cousins or if they already kind of are trying to build the future in Michael Penix, and because they do have a lot of young skill position players on rookie deals right now. That would have been the approach I would have taken without going down the Kirk Cousins track. So it just seems like they're kind of living in two different worlds, and I think it's going to be really confusing and somewhat difficult for both people. But at the end of the day, Kirk Cousins is a professional. I do think he will very much take Michael Penix under his wing and try to offer him as much as possible. But that's a situation where both those guys are going to try and get familiar in Zach Robinson's offense. And if they're splitting reps, somebody's growth is going to be somewhat stunted at that point in time. And I think that's going to be, the potential scary point and downfall for the Atlanta Falcons, when all of this kind of transpires.
Yeah, and so something that we've talked about on the class play quite a bit is what we expect is going to happen with these quarterbacks in 3 or 4 years. And so to close out kind of the Penix topic, I want to pose the question that I posed to you, Tej, this week, really, on Tuesday. 3 or 4 years, where is Michael Penix now?
So this kind of has changed, but it actually kind of stayed the same from what we talked about on Tuesday. We talked about him as someone who could have a Gardner Minshew type career where he's alternating as starter and backup. And I mean, again, you look at Kirk Cousins and kind of the age that he's going to be at in the second, third, fourth year of this contract, 37, 38-year-old quarterback, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. So maybe there's bouts where Kirk Cousins has to sit out a couple games because his durability isn't what it used to be. And that's really where Penix can come in and keep the ship afloat for those games. Maybe there's a season where they decide to actually do make the change from Cousins to Penix, and Penix performs decently, but maybe not up to a top 10 pick standard. And he falls into that Gardner Minshew bucket again, where he's kind of hovering around between like the 25th and 35th best quarterback in the NFL. Like, I think this pick, despite it being a top 10 pick, and you might not want the 25th best quarterback at number 8 overall, like it still kind of is in line with what we projected from him from his NFL career.
For sure. And talking about doing those projections, when we look at the draft, there's a lot of uncertainty there, and there's a lot of uncertainty in each pick. And so one of the most shocking things that'll lead us into our second quarterback, JJ McCarthy, was the analytically based, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah Vikings trading up once, way before the draft, then trading up again, and then trading up yet another time. And so we have a great question from Grant, and I'll let Ben answer this. Talk value on these Vikings trade ups. What are your thoughts, kind of from the pure analytical Ben Brown side, the betting genius, the fantasy god, the analysis and roster value guy? What are your thoughts just on the sheer value of these trade ups at the end of round 1?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it feels like they gave up a top 5 pick to draft Dallas Turner is, I think, the equation and how it's kind of balanced out at the end of the day, because they already had pick 11. They moved up to pick 10 to get JJ McCarthy. And I think, for all intents and purposes, that was maybe like a late 4th round pick that they gave up, maybe even not quite that. So then to actually go and get Dallas Turner, when you factor in the first trade that Kwesi made to get pick 23, and then very much what they gave to get from 23 to 17, like, that was an expensive acquisition. And I think when you have a guy, especially that seemed to slide, I would say today, very much expected to be the first defensive player off the board, didn't actually live up to that billing. Like, that's a situation where there were some red flags, and there were teams that very much passed on him or took him off their board entirely. And then you go in and you kind of make a splash play in order to do it. I get it from the fact that he wants to be all in and have a winner right now, but I think in a lot of ways, they maybe sacrifice somewhat of their future to go up and get Dallas Turner. And I'm not convinced that is the correct or the most sound approach to actually build out this roster in the most successful way.
That makes a lot of sense, but a lot of that can be washed away with a great quarterback, as we've seen. And the Vikings have their quarterback now. They have JJ McCarthy. Tej, before I get moved to Ben, the emotional Vikings fan, give us a rundown. We've covered JJ McCarthy in totality before. We have articles, we have videos, we've talked about him many times. What do you think is going to happen with him on the Vikings, and what do you think about the moves they made today?
Yeah, I mean, I think this worked out well for both sides. Pre the other trade up for Dallas Turner, I was ready to give the Vikings a lot of flowers for how they handled this. They didn't panic and trade up to number 5 overall, number 4 overall. They kind of let JJ McCarthy come to them. I'm sure they didn't plan on Penix going in the top 10, but that's also something that kind of pushed everyone's board, up a spot. But I think we talked about JJ McCarthy being maybe the most situation-dependent quarterback in this draft. And we talked about how the Vikings have a situation where whoever they take has a decent chance of becoming QB2, QB3 out of the top quarterbacks that we saw get taken today. So maybe you do get that perfect marriage where JJ McCarthy can come in, and he doesn't even have to start day 1 because they do have Sam Darnold there that can give them, competent level quarterback play. But I think when you have JJ McCarthy eventually start, he's going to be throwing to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson when he comes back from injury, Aaron Jones, who I think is really good out of the backfield. The tackles are really good in Minnesota. They've run out some picks to build up the interior of their offensive line, but I still think that Kevin O'Connell as a play caller will give him an advantage and help him develop. And I think it would be really strong to say that it could be like a Brock Purdy situation. You're not going to probably hit the highest efficiency in the NFL, but you could get a situation like either Jimmy Garoppolo or Tua in Miami, where you're getting top 5 to 10 efficiency from your quarterback because of the situation he's in.
Yeah, no, you bring up Brock Purdy, and the moves today kind of resemble the pillars of the 49ers run. You have all these good players, and then you find someone who can keep the engines running in Brock Purdy. And I think we've talked about it a lot, guys. JJ McCarthy kind of has some of those things where he's a mobile guy. Mm-hmm. He can make the plays, the basic plays that need to be made, and he has the ability to hit some windows. It's just kind of the other stuff that scares us. And then you pick up a Dallas Turner. Is that their Nick Bosa? There's a lot of uncertainty there. Who knows? Focusing still on JJ McCarthy, Ben. We talked about getting your view. This is like kind of what we've been waiting for a couple months. If the Vikings got JJ McCarthy, obviously in a vacuum, right, it only cost that, late 4th round pick to move up one spot rather than the farm to move up to 2, 3, or 4. What's the value there? How are you feeling now? You have a quarterback post Cousins. What's the next move here?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I definitely agree with what, Tej initially laid out, basically, which was that, and like you said, Sam, like the Vikings didn't really mortgage their future to get JJ McCarthy. And in a lot of ways, they kind of let the hand play out and let him kind of come to them. They didn't go up to 5 and trade with the Los Angeles Chargers. And it very much seemed like that was kind of on the table. So I think overall, like how they approach the quarterback position is encouraging. And I think, the reasons why we were maybe, or me personally wasn't as like optimistic on JJ McCarthy as, and this idea of like upside with, Drake May. But the things that we don't understand about JJ McCarthy, or the reasons why we maybe don't agree with that similar upside, is we just haven't seen it yet, right? So there's just more an element of not knowing what JJ McCarthy is capable of. But like Tej said, like this is an offense within the Minnesota Vikings that can very much, he can rely on as he kind of finds his own way in the NFL. And then when he does do that, like there are going to be some pieces and some buttons, I think, that Kevin O'Connell can push that are really going to maybe hopefully start to show through in like year 2 and year 3. And you can see, the McCarthy ability in a similar way to navigate an offense like Brock Purdy does. I think personally, like there's a case where like, him playing in a similar vein to like Baker Mayfield, Tua Tagovailoa, like those are comps that we've had from like a text analytics standpoint that I think fit kind of well with JJ McCarthy. And you can win on an offense that the Minnesota Vikings have with that sort of play at quarterback for a guy on a rookie deal. And I think that's what they have right now. And there's still maybe an element of unknown on the upside, but I actually think the floor for how the Vikings can perform with JJ McCarthy at quarterback is already better than what they're going to get from like Sam Darnold, I would say, for sure.
Yeah, that I totally agree with that. And I think you have 2 options in the building now. So that'll move me from a place where there's 2 options in the building to now there's 4 options in the building with the Broncos. They go with Bo Nix. Does Sean Payton have his guy now? Or are they employing like, the much thought about the kind of slash and burn quarterback strategy where you have Jared Stidham, a guy who's been in a couple quarterback rooms, hasn't seen a ton of play. You give him a shot. You have Zach Wilson, kind of the depressed asset who may still have some juice. You give him a shot. You have Bo Nix that you got at 12. You used a premium pick at a premium position. You give him a shot, and then you maybe take your shot somewhere else. Ben DiNucci maybe. Like, what's going through Sean Payton's head, and analytically, how do you think it plays out?
I mean, you bring up a lot of good points there. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this Broncos quarterback room actually comes to fruition. I do think that Bo Nix is probably the leader in the clubhouse to be the week 1 starter because you invested number 12 overall in him. I think that the Broncos had to go out and do something at quarterback this offseason. I think when you looked at some of their options, like I'm sure someone like Jake Browning was maybe considered for a trade, but the Bengals obviously wanted to keep him. I think Jameis Winston, because of that prior history with Sean Payton, like maybe that didn't work out because of the personality difference between the 2 of them. So like it really left the Broncos to a situation where they had to trade for Zach Wilson earlier this week. They had to take Bo Nix in the draft. I think when you look at Bo Nix, he had the lowest adjusted air yards of any quarterback prospect in this draft, but Oregon's offense was pretty efficient with him doing that. So if you're Sean Payton, do you trust yourself enough as an offensive designer where you can scheme up an offense where it's very screen based, which I think was his specialty in New Orleans, but also very quick in terms of the timings of the routes that'll be happening and some of the execution of the offense. And that's why the Russell Wilson, Sean Payton experiment didn't really work, because you kind of had the opposite of that last year, where we know Russell Wilson likes to hold on to the ball, likes to be creative. Maybe you try to reverse that with Bo Nix. I think it's going to be a pretty big gamble to make if you're Sean Payton and the Broncos, but I could see a path where it ends up working just because of that quick execution that he has in his toolbox.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so you look at this supposedly Bo Nix led team, Ben, set the over-under for them this year of what you may be able to expect from a Bo Nix team coming off of kind of a weird year with Russell Wilson there, where some people thought they were tanking, and all of a sudden they win several games.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is still, and this was, I think, the discussion around both like the Raiders and the Denver Broncos basically, and what they were going to do in the draft here, because these are both rosters, I would say, that are very, very seemingly, I would say, farther away. And I do think in some ways, like, the Denver Broncos do have some blue chip type talent at certain positions, but this is still a team that I think is like plus 5-1 basically to like make the playoffs in a lot of scenarios. So are they a 7-win team? Maybe, but I still don't think, to me, they're not anywhere closer to competing for the AFC West championship or the AFC West division championship than they were before today, whether they would have gotten defense or quarterback. And I know people aren't really high on the next year's quarterback class already. So if you pass on a guy this year, that could be part of the reason why we saw such a front running at the quarterback position. But I just think overall, like, it doesn't move the needle enough for me unless Sean Payton does have some sort of magic up his sleeve. And I'm just not seeing that right now. So I do think they're probably still, borderline 5.5, 6-win teams, one of the worst, worst projections of football for sure.
Yeah. And to add on to what you're saying there, like, it's interesting, right? Because like on our draft guide, we had Bo Nix's closest comp as Kenny Pickett. Mm-hmm. I even saw Derek Klassen. He came up with that comp from studying film as well. So I think that's like something very similar. And I think Kenny Pickett was like considered a little bit of a reach at where he was taken. And so if Bo Nix has a similar career to that, then like you're talking about even more of a reach, which is really interesting for Denver. I was wondering if like they were going to get cute maybe and try to trade back to the 20s and still get Bo Nix there. But like, I don't know if you necessarily want to mess around if you're convicted that this is your quarterback, which like you mentioned, like jury is still out on that. It'll be interesting to follow. Like the quick time to throw will definitely be something that I think Denver's offense might be able to benefit from. It'll just be if he can actually go along with everything else that the offense entails.
Yeah. So we've covered some of the more surprising picks, but basically up until that number 8 pick, everything went along schedule. Yeah. And so you look at the number 1 pick, Caleb Williams. I got to see a little bit of him in the press conference. You see him on TV, very energetic, kind of leader guy, Caleb Williams, which we haven't necessarily seen in the past year per se. QB1 gets his kind of young wide receiver in Rome Odunze at 9. So Tej, tell us a little bit about that surrounding cast. Have we ever seen anything really like this in recent history? Like, how do you feel about the Bears this year?
Mm-hmm. I like so much of what you mentioned there, because when you look at usually where number 1 picks end up situation-wise, it's usually the team picking number 1 overall. So like I say, it was the worst team last year that is picking that quarterback. Obviously the Bears had this situation where they were the 9th worst team in the league last year. You could even say at the end of the season, they were probably around middle of the pack in most team rating systems. And they get to add, Keenan Allen, who's still an elite separator, and Rome Odunze, who's just like an all-around reception perception, like can do any route, is a player who I think has a relatively high floor. Like, I think this is the best situation that a number 1 pick has walked into in recent history. I think it's one of the better situations a top 10 pick at quarterback has walked into as well. I remember looking at CJ Stroud during the preseason last year, and I thought Nico Collins was an underrated receiver, and Dalton Schultz is a decent tight end, and Tank Dell showed flashes in the preseason. but you still didn't know what that supporting cast would look like until it actually played out on the field. And once the Texans got rolling from week 4 onward, you saw like, yeah, these are great receivers, and CJ Stroud is also great because of that. I think Caleb Williams might be able to have that from day one, because we know what DJ Moore and Keenan Allen are. Right. We know that the offensive line is at least below average, maybe it's average. And then Shane Waldron, I think, is someone who will come out with a pretty innovative offense early in the season. It's just something he has to sustain over the season. So we could see Caleb Williams potentially from week 1 be a decent option when it comes to starting level quarterback, both in the NFL and both if you're thinking about him in fantasy. Like, I think it's just a good place for him to go into, and the Bears have done a good job supporting him.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in terms of supporting him, supporting that city, a city that some of those records, Ben, are so paltry. And I think that Caleb Williams, it's been much talked about, has a case, especially now that he has 3, if not great wide receivers, highly invested in wide receivers. Yeah. Do you think he breaks some of those records this year?
I mean, I would not be surprised. I think in some ways, obviously, the game script as well is going to influence some of the traditional counting stats, but you guys hit the nail on the head. Like, I think my question wasn't necessarily like, can DJ Moore and Keenan Allen like be a fit around Caleb Williams, but the way in which they win, I would say specifically Keenan Allen is like very much, top of route timing based type things. And I just didn't know if Caleb Williams was going to have that in his arsenal, play in and play out every single game in his rookie year. And I think now they kind of have that Malik Neighbors guy who can be, the big play downfield, maybe in a broken play, maybe in some other type of scenarios that Shane Waldron schemes up. And they can kind of rely more on the big play ability that Caleb Williams very much has and gravitates towards, and don't necessarily need to be as methodical moving the chains with a guy like Keenan Allen. And I think that is just going to make everything easier for everybody, because they're still going to have that as a part of the option or wrinkle within the offense, but it's not going to be the only way that they can move the football. So I like the situation that he's landed in. And I really think at the end of the day, like Ryan Poles probably deserves a ton of credit and kudos for building this out the last couple seasons and using some wise trades to actually be in a position to not only go up and get the number 1 overall selection, the top guy, but also surround him with a ton of talent as well. And I think overall, this rebuild is going to be quick and over quickly. And I think it speaks to, a team building approach that we would all buy into. And I think that's like an exciting thing to see kind of play out in front of us.
Yeah. And I'm glad Tej mentioned kind of the CJ Stroud situation, because, that was kind of not necessarily a shock this year, but, he went pick 2. There was a lot of questions, good or otherwise, or proven or otherwise, of how they would perform. There was a new coach. Here we're in a situation where there's a defensive coach that is proven. Shane Waldron has, nursed the health of Geno Smith's career back, and you're giving him, 2 Pro Bowl wide receivers and the 9th pick in the draft that many probably thought was, if not wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 in the class. And a lot of people looked at all 3 as really good. So I'm really excited to watch that Bears team. I know people in Chicago are also really excited for a good Bears team. So it's going to be exciting to see a player like Caleb, who everyone considered to be a generational talent, be in a generationally good situation. And talking about the other 2 situations that, Jaden Daniels and Drake May went into, we've also talked at length about them 2, and they slotted into the positions that we thought they were going to slot into. You have Jaden Daniels with the Commanders, playing in that Cliff Kingsbury kind of air raid system. And then you have Drake May going to kind of the new look Patriots. We've talked so much about them, and there was all this talk of which one should go 2, which one should go 3. It switched up, but now it's set. Their situations are set, and we get to watch them play. And so I want to ask both of you. I'll ask Tej first. Who do you think is going to be better in 2 or 3 years? Do you think it's going to be Jaden Daniels, or do you think it's going to be Drake May?
So it really goes back to this nature versus nurture stuff that we've been talking about a lot this draft season, where I leaned Drake May from a prospect perspective because he's much younger. I thought he had a great arm, ideal height, weight for quarterbacks, which does matter, which is predictive. when we build our athleticism score metrics. Like, I thought he stacked up on so many different things. The thing that I thought Jaden Daniels did a lot or had going for him was his rushing ability. His 12.2% scramble rate from StatsBomb last year is going to give him a little bit of a longer leash to figure out how to do other quarterback stuff in the NFL. I think we've seen that with Kyler Murray. We've seen that with Josh Allen. Like, they can take time to figure out some of the passing, some of the sack avoidance, because they can scramble and get out of any situation. But I think that when you look at Drake May and the situation he's walking into in New England, where I like Kendrick Bourne, but they really don't have great receiving options. I still think their offensive line is just okay. I don't know if he's going to get developed as well as Jaden Daniels is, where I'm pretty pro Dan Quinn. I think he's pretty into analytics and going to use that to his advantage. I think that they obviously have invested a lot in receivers, and most of those guys have stayed. So I could see a scenario where Jaden Daniels is just developed a little bit better. His situation is a little bit better, and he becomes the better quarterback because of that. But I still just lean into Drake May's talent level, and I think he can still become a good player, even despite the help not necessarily being there initially, just because of how many big time throws he can make and some of his arm talent and just his scramble ability as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I just want to pull up Grant. Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And as any of these questions that I pose to Ben and Tej or that I answer as they come up, we love the discussion in the chat. Keep chiming in. We'll try to get to any questions as we can. But this is the draft. We're excited, and we hope you're excited too. So happy to answer anything. Ben, I posed the same question to you, sir. Drake May or Jaden Daniels?
Yeah, I'm very much with Tej. I do think the Jaden Daniels situation for how we're going to see it play forth is very much going to help. To me, it kind of goes back to the offensive coordinators. Obviously, none of us are going to speak, glowingly about Cliff Kingsbury, but I think there is something to be said about a coach having a second opportunity and at least having similar pieces in place to potentially build on some of his mistakes that he made in the first time. And I very much could see Cliff Kingsbury kind of growing from that experience in Arizona, taking some of the things that he was successful with Kyler Murray and being able to apply some of those wrinkles, I would say, to the Washington Commanders offensively. So I do definitely lean in that direction. I think from basically any sort of counting stat, PFF grade, whatever we're going to look at, it will be Jaden Daniels as the better option in a couple of years. And I think it's nerve-wracking. I think, Drake May, obviously, you talk about the wide receivers, Alex Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator. To me, it's concerning, having a new head coach that's come up through the defense side of the football with a young quarterback. I do think in some ways, the influence on how they're going to try and win football games is impacted through those head coaching decisions. And Alex Van Pelt, offensive coordinator, didn't really have the play calling responsibilities in Cleveland. So I think in a lot of ways, he's a little bit raw and developing a wrinkle that can be successful offensively. And when you fold in those things along with the offensive talent that the New England Patriots have, I don't really think, as high as I am on Drake May before the draft, I just don't see the odds very much feel stacked against him to be really successful in his first couple seasons in that sort of environment. I think that's very much, got to be the takeaway and my justification and reasoning for why I didn't think the New England Patriots would go in that direction.
Yeah, and I love putting things in terms of different sports because I think it gives you a good idea of what something can look like in, storyline or in situation, but not necessarily with the nuts and bolts of football that we can get kind of caught up in. And I kind of look at this situation very similarly to kind of a Trae Young and a Luka Doncic situation, obviously, where, Luka Doncic went into a situation where there was old Dirk Nowitzki, much like there's kind of the ghost of Bill Belichick and Tom Brady hanging over the Patriots right now. And you had Trae Young go into a little better organized Atlanta Hawks team. And so you go 2 years or however many years, and you see Trae Young make it to, conference finals out of nowhere, despite the flaws. And you see Luka not reach it that far. But now I think all the years gone by, it's totally switched. And maybe we all kind of knew, much like kind of the consensus was, that perhaps Drake May was the better prospect, in quotes. You see the kind of better quote prospect or the more stereotypical prospect long term end up growing into what we expected him to be, where Jaden Daniels is still probably an explosive player and a good player, but can't reach those heights and can't push his team that far in the playoffs. And so before we move to our next segment, I want to give a huge shout out to Underdog for sponsoring this show and the show before it. And so I want to ask a question just to close this segment off. 6 quarterbacks, in the 2024 first round. Which quarterback do you think is the best play for fantasy this year, Tej?
Do you want to do ADP based on ADP or just straight up?
Just straight up.
Okay, yeah. So I will run our fantasy projections. After the draft, I'm excited to see the results. The easy answer is I think Jaden Daniels, because I think his rushing ability is going to be at such a high level, especially when they get down in the red zone and some of the rushing touchdowns that he's going to get, where I think that he could have. Maybe it's a little bit less than 4,000 yards passing, but he could have a very high end rushing season. You're looking at something like, if I pulled up his pre-draft projections, like we had him projected at 652 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. Now that I know he's going to Washington and a Cliff Kingsbury offense, and like if you remember Arizona's first year, like the rushing offense was really good under Cliff Kingsbury. It ended up regressing a little bit after. I think he could hit 750, 800 rushing yards, maybe get close to double-digit amount of rushing touchdowns. And we know how important rushing is for quarterbacks in fantasy. Like I think that's a really good option. And ADP wise, I think that JJ McCarthy is going to be a decent option, because when you look at best ball drafts on Underdog, promo code Sumer for 100% match up to $100 there. I think when you're drafting JJ McCarthy, maybe round 16 through 18, like you're banking on a CJ Stroud type situation where he's being undervalued, even despite being in a really good situation. And all he has to do is get 100, 120 yards each game. And like, he's producing a lot of fantasy points that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as someone who had RG3 back in the day, in his rookie year, I can see something like that happening in the fantasy world, where RG3 ended up being one of the first really effective running quarterbacks in fantasy. And now Jaden Daniels fills that in. I'll pose the same question to you, Ben. What's kind of your play for this year in fantasy?
Yeah. So I would say, I think, Robert Griffin the third won me a fantasy championship in his rookie season as well. So I'm very much like partial to that approach, but I think more of a slam dunk, obviously like some injury aspects are very much going to take a toll on basically all these, rookie quarterbacks and how often they actually get to play in their rookie season. But I do think the situation with Caleb Williams is really intriguing. And I do think when you look around, specifically the rest of the NFC and the NFC North, like there's not a lot of like really quality defenses. I do think in a lot of ways, the Detroit Lions last year played in a lot of shootout type games. Vikings as well, like they had Brian Flores, a defensive coordinator, added a lot to the edge rush position, but still a secondary that I think is going to be weak. So I think overall, like there is some shootout type potential in the NFC North. Given what Caleb Williams has from a weapon standpoint, I would very much go in that direction. I do think it's probably the easiest answer.
Yeah, you took. I was probably going to go with Caleb. Just the weapons, man. I mean, the weapons are crazy this year for him, and I think that Jaden Daniels is also a good play there too, because you have the wide receivers and Terry McLaurin and some of those guys, and you have the Jahan Dotson also.
Eric's guy.
Yeah,
Eric is the biggest Jahan Dotson fan that I know, and so I'm hoping that maybe he breaks out with Jaden Daniels there now.
Yeah, we have these pretty new mics, and I think we might have caught a whisper of just Jahan. So as you're looking on Underdog Fantasy, keep an eye out for Jahan Dotson. Also keep an eye out for Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams as well. So we'll move into our next segment here of just what are the biggest surprises. And so we have a special guest from PFF to kind of discuss his biggest surprise. We'll have you move this way, Ben. We'll have Arjun Menon come in wearing his Chargers jersey.
Here, straight.
Just ready. Take a seat right here, Arjun. Yeah. Take this mic and put it on your lapel and tell us kind of what your biggest surprise of the draft was and how it may or may not, go with your jersey that you're wearing.
I'll just talk real quick. So are you asking specifically about the Chargers or any other surprise?
Yeah, let's ask about the Chargers first, and then we'll go to the surprises after.
Yeah, so honestly, like I was expecting them to take an offensive lineman. I think the hype had been built up so much. So I was like kind of expecting it. I kind of like reasoned with it in my mind. I was hoping it wasn't JC Latham, mainly because he would have had like one of the lowest consensus board ranks of any top 5 pick in the past like 8 years. He's like 15th on the consensus board, and most players are 12 and above. But he is like one of the most athletic tackles in the draft. Also, like has one of the best pedigrees of any tackle in the draft. I think he's athletic enough to move to right tackle, which sounds like the plan right now. But I can't lie and say like I don't necessarily agree with the pick, and I understand like why they did it. Harbaugh's a trenches guy; he's gonna build it from the inside out. But I do think there were some better options on the board in terms of helping them win instantly right now.
Yeah, that makes sense, guys. What are y'all's thoughts on the Joe Alt pick?
Yeah, I mean the question I have for Arjun is, if you were in Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz's shoes, would you have gone league neighbors there? Would you have looked to trade out? Would you like what would kind of your thought process have been with that pick?
Yeah, I think I would have gone neighbors one. That Chargers receiving room just lacking a lot of juice. It's always been, one of the slowest rooms in the league. It lacks explosiveness, and I think that's something neighbors gives you instantly from day one. Like Josh Palmer's been a wide receiver 3 his whole career, and that he's right now number 1 on the depth chart. They have 4 receivers signed to the active roster. Like it's just a barren room. Like they need to add to it. And my biggest thing was like, yeah, the tackle room is probably like the tackle draft class in the draft is probably a little bit top heavy, but you have like Trey Pipkins is like an average tackle. It's not like you have like nothing there. Like he's an average tackle. But you don't have any like quality like number 1 receivers on the team. And I think that's something that neighbors can give you. If they didn't take neighbors, I would have rather have traded out to take a different tackle than take Joe Alt at 5. And again, it's a roster that got kind of like, cleaned up a little bit in the offseason. So there's needs at other positions. And I think trading down would have allowed them to address maybe another position at 23, but it takes 2 to tango. And, it didn't really seem like anyone was interested in coming up for JJ. So it's all good.
I do think that is probably like the biggest takeaway for what the Chargers did at 5 was like, there was just no real trade market that developed for any team to go up to the 5th pick. And in a lot of ways it didn't make sense for the Giants too, if they did want JJ McCarthy in that scenario. So yeah, I don't mind it there, but I think they're in a prime position, I would say, to at least get somebody in the first 5 picks of the second round. Or, well, who would you, is there a wide receiver that you would rather have that's on the board right now? Or would you rather see, maybe a veteran trade for a guy like T. Higgins, Brandon or Deebo Samuel to kind of fill that wide receiver 1 void for your San Diego Chargers?
I wouldn't trade. I think if you trade away Keenan Allen because of salary, you're not going to trade and sign them. So I wouldn't look in that direction. Honestly, at this point, like, I think AD Mitchell is probably like one of the only guys left who can really develop into a wide receiver 1. I know Ladd played outside and, Keon Coleman's there, but like at this point, maybe it's better to just like say, we can ignore the receiver position. We'll do it in the 3rd round. And you can go after like a Cooper DeJean or a Kool-Aid McKinstry. Like the Chargers don't have corners either. Like you look at their corner room, it is like completely, they have like it's very void of talent. And I think like Cooper DeJean and Kool-Aid are both guys who are mocked in the 1st round. So getting them at 37 would be more of a value than someone like Ladd or maybe AD Mitchell, who are, mocked a little bit later or have like an EDP of, in the 30s.
Yeah. And the Chargers do seem like they have the draft capital to do that. 37, 69, 105, 110. Like I think they can really start to stockpile some talent there and to take some dart throws from that perspective. But where do you kind of see the offensive line shaking out? Do you think that Rashawn Slater is the one who stays at left tackle? Joe Alt is the one who moves over to right tackle? What do you think Trey Pipkins, kind of slides into? Does he become kind of the backup tackle that'll fill in if either one of those guys is injured, or does he move over to something like right guard and the Chargers try to make their offensive line not have any weak links?
Yeah, I think Alt will be a day 1 starter at right tackle. Like I think they'll say it's competition, but like I really don't think it'll be like that. I think there'll be some competition between Pipkins and Sawyer for right guard. Which would be interesting because Pipkins has never played guard in his life. But I think whoever loses that probably just becomes the swing tackle full time. And again, like Trey Pipkins has like an $8 million cap hit. So like, you know, that's probably one of the higher cap hits for a swing tackle in the league. Unless like Olu Fashanu starts for the Jets and then Moses or Tyron becomes a swing tackle. But I think Alt is the day one starter for them.
Yeah.
I love this quote. Positionless O-line is a new one. But it is something that we kind of saw in the draft, which we'll probably get to later. But Arjun, what were some of your other surprises in the draft?
Yeah, I think no defenders going until Latu at 15. I mean, I had a feeling like, you know, from the Bears to the Colts, like that was going to be like a big offensive run. But I still thought like a team like the Raiders could use a corner, or like, you know, I didn't necessarily think the Broncos had to take a quarterback, and like their edge room is kind of, you know, weak. And I thought they could have gone with like a Dallas Turner or Latu. So that huge run on offensive players was interesting. And the Latu pick is interesting as well, because like, you know, the Colts have Kwity Paye, Ode Yingbo. They just signed Ebukam last year. You know, they just re-signed DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart. Like they've made a lot of investments in that D-line, but like considering Gus Bradley's scheme is literally built on rush 4, drop 7, play cover 3, like you need good pass rushers. And I think that's what Latu provides. And it wasn't a surprise pick, and I love the pick and I love the fit for them. Obviously, hopefully the medicals all work out for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you brought up the Raiders. I think that was another great surprise. Me, as someone who loves 12 personnel and loves tight ends, and thinks that in the future, as we see some of these tight ends kind of become more, you know, blocking hybrid, this is something that we've kind of disagreed upon. Tej has written about positional diversity a lot. So I'll kind of set up a debate here, guys. Give us a little about positional diversity and whether or not you liked the pick, just in general, the idea of like this 12 personnel scheme with good 2 tight ends, not necessarily the value of the pick. And then we'll let Arjun like talk about his thoughts about it.
Yeah. So if we remove like the actual draft value or kind of like the first round tight end debate away from this, like it is in a vacuum, I could see how this works out for the Raiders, where you have someone like Brock Bowers, who he's not like, he can be considered a tight end. He's obviously going to be on the smaller side. He might even play more of a role like Puka Nacua did last year for the Rams, where you split him out wide a decent amount like he did at Georgia. You can use him in the backfield at times, and even gave him handoffs like he also did in college. But also like he's going to block decently well enough to at least provide extra value there. And so when you put him and Mayer out on the field at the same time, like I think that will be a pretty tough tell for defenses to figure out. Usually when we see 12 personnel on the field, it means there's a higher chance of a run happening. But like with Bowers and Mayer out there now, maybe that means it's a higher chance of a pass for the Raiders. Like I think there's a lot of fun stuff they can do with their offense if they end up scheming it right, just because they can get into so many different looks where it might not even be the actual personnel that's on the field. It's really where they're lined up, whether both of them are out wide, one of them's in the slot, one of them's out wide, you know, they're in line in the backfield. Like there's a lot of moving chess pieces that they'll have available to them because of this pick.
Did they re-sign Austin Hooper in free agency? Do you know by any chance?
I don't know, actually.
I think there might have been a 1-year deal, which like he's like a very average tight end, if anything. But I love the point. I think the main thing is like, he didn't re-sign?
No.
Did they sign any tight end?
No.
They signed Harrison.
Bryant.
Okay, yeah. My bad. Wrong
Former Brown.
Yeah. My biggest thing is like, does Bowers increase the likelihood that defenses play base against that look? Like if they come out in 12, but Bowers lines up in the slot, will a defense still come out with 3 linebackers? And I think you do that, typically you'll find that offenses are more efficient passing against base. So if you are able to increase how much base defense you're facing, I think that's one of those like second order effects. That's a good pick, or I can understand why it would be a good pick, and I could see the value in it. But they still have Gardner Minshew at quarterback. Like they still have a pretty weak offensive line. They have a hole at right tackle. They have a hole on the interior, and Fuaga was right there. Fatanu was right there. Like positional value wise, like they probably could have gotten better value elsewhere. But I think in a bigger picture outlook, like I think it just increases, like Tej said, the diversity of their offense and like how defenses are going to have to play them, which I think will be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think that's a great breakdown. And I think bringing it back to some examples, we saw how the Chiefs and the 49ers for that matter in the playoffs utilized 12 and 13 personnel to get those looks like we talked about, rather than it just being kind of, you're trotting somebody out and you're just sticking in nickel. And I think that may have been part of the downfall of the Falcons last year, bringing Pitts in and having
Johnny Smith.
Yeah, Johnny Smith. Delaney Walker was speaking of mixing up Browns, I was mixing up Titans, but Johnny Smith, obviously, and just not getting the looks that they needed made it hard on Desmond Ridder.
Yeah.
And then obviously made it hard on Taylor Heineke as well. I think it could be a very similar situation. The difference being is that Bowers is known for his blocking ability, and Michael Mayer was also very known for his blocking ability. And in theory, while they probably don't have the high-end catch radius, catchability of a Kyle Pitts, like these are two kind of the more well-rounded tight ends that we've seen come out of a draft. And obviously you give yourself that kind of view of tight ends typically have a later development curve. And you could be in a spot where you have two great tight ends and maybe you build around that. I think the quarterback position obviously needs to be settled to even make this in anything, especially if you're just blocking with these guys anyway, and they're trotting in base and not really a lot is occurring.
Yeah. And I do think there's like an interesting angle to this where we've talked so much about how first round tight ends, like it's not a gamble I would make personally. I would definitely, let someone else try to make that work, because we don't know really how to project tight ends from college to pro. And then you mentioned the age curve. Like that's also something you have to wait on. I do think there's an argument to be made though that tight ends are undervalued on their second and third contracts, especially when you compare their receiving yards or their WAR, whatever type of metric you want to use, to what like wide receiver twos now get paid. And you kind of can see like, tight ends are probably undervalued. So it's like conditional on these things hitting, these picks hitting both Mayer and Bowers. You're not going to get a ton of surplus value from their rookie contracts, but you should get a fair amount of surplus value on their second contracts. Obviously that conditional, that condition I put in there is like the toughest part of it all. Like I feel less confident about Brock Bowers hitting than I do about any other of these picks in the top 16 other than the quarterbacks, just because it's so tough to know if tight ends are going to do well at the next level. But like if they do get that to work for them, like I think that could be something that helps them down the line. But you're really just projecting 4 or 5 years down the road and hoping it works out for you when you really want to try to maximize these next 3 years as a team builder.
Yeah, I just have to agree. We talk so much about that positional value, and I think that goes into what the big surprise was with the Brock Bowers pick. Obviously, not only that they have a tight end already, but the Raiders do have a lot of positions of need, and tight end really
not wrong.
They really wasn't one of those, and so there's so many parts to it, but if there's a way that it ends up working out, then more power to them, I suppose. But you just look at the law of averages kind of, and it typically hasn't broken that way. And I think that's what typically kind of breaks into some of these surprises. So another question I wanted to ask, and another thing that typically hasn't worked out, the consensus big board typically does do pretty good as compared to any given general manager or any given analyst or something like that. And so the 49ers, we've talked a lot about the 12 personnel and 13 personnel, and they do one of the best jobs of scheming up things for guys. But the 49ers went and had quite a reach, probably one of the bigger reaches other than maybe Michael Penix of the draft, picking Ricky Pearsall at the end of the first round. Well, what are kind of your thoughts on, number one, making that huge reach, and number two, what this shows about what they're going to do with their wide receiver room? Let's start with you, Tej.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at Ricky Pearsall, expected draft position of 57.2 from the draft guide, he's also 23.7 years old when getting drafted today. So, definitely one of the more interesting choices of the first round. Highly athletic, just someone who took a while to break out in Florida. But like, I think when you look at what the 49ers want to build their offense out of, it's separation and it's yards after catchability, because usually those things are correlated. And I think he falls in that bucket. I just don't know if like this was necessarily the time to take him. Like you mentioned, like it is an older receiver. It's probably someone that might have even been available for your second round pick. So definitely one of the bigger surprises of the draft. But I do trust the infrastructure that Kyle Shanahan has built to be able to put rookies into good situations, especially on offense. And I know it took Brandon Ayuk a little bit of time until he got to a high level in the NFL. And maybe we do see the 49ers end up moving someone like Deebo Samuel, tomorrow or on day 3 to kind of supplement this. And that's like the plan that they had in place this whole time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you have those two kind of big money guys, Ayuk and Samuel. Samuel's had a lot of, injury issues there. Ben, I want to get a feeling for you. Do you think Pearsall is in the mix for like a fantasy contributor next year? Do you think maybe he gets involved in the rush game? Like, how do you see him fitting in the 49ers?
Yeah, I very much think the 49ers kind of have an atypical type at the wide receiver position, not only in who they're trying to draft, but also in like the way in which they're utilizing him. And I do think like the Ricky Pearsall draft selection, although it seems a little bit like a reach, like it does make sense within the confines of the void that they're probably going to be needing to fill here in the next couple of days or something. I very much think that it does signal, movement of either Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. I'm assuming it would probably be Deebo Samuel, although the contract situation that he's under, like they're not going to get a ton of value, if anything, really for him. And that could very much just be like a lateral move. But bringing in Pearsall, I think at least can answer some of those questions. And although he didn't have a ton of like the rushing usage that a guy like Deebo Samuel would project to have, like he does have the athleticism, and he is a guy that can move and play basically any particular wide receiver position, can play inside and outside, and doesn't necessarily need to be like a traditional X wide receiver. And I think that's the reason why it at least makes sense from a team building standpoint. So if I was trying to project like an ideal state, I would at least be more accepting of what the 49ers did in this particular case than like the Brock Bowers and the Raiders and the 12 personnel thing, and us trying to project like that being a successful thing is kind of the only scenario we could work out.
Yeah, that was a pretty big surprise. And so we have a question. Did the Niners want Worthy and had to go Pearsall after the Chiefs jumped them? Arjun, what are your thoughts?
I don't think so. I just don't think Worthy like kind of fits what Shanahan wants to do at the receiver position. Like Mike McDaniel, maybe that would have worked, but like I don't see Shanahan prioritizing like speed that much as maybe some of his other assistants. Also, like I don't know if Purdy has the arm to like throw it to get it to Worthy on a deep route or anything. But like going off Ben's point, like Pearsall, like his athleticism is great. He's also like a bigger receiver, right? So like, Shanahan has built his offense around throwing over the middle of the field. So you need some of those like bigger body receivers to like make those contested catches. Like, I think Pearsall could eventually maybe develop into what Juwan Jennings has been for them on third down, on some of those like in breakers or things like that. And I think Jennings, he was an RFA, I think. So I think he got tendered. So he's only on a 1-year deal. So, even if they don't move Ayuk or Deebo, like Pearsall is going to have like a specific role. And I think like because of the attention that Ayuk and Deebo both get, like he has the opportunity to get a lot of one-on-one coverage, probably with the worst corner on the defense. And so I think he could contribute right away. And I think because of his build, I think he would fit a Shanahan offense quite well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And talking about kind of the fit of a player, you kind of bemoaned that in the media. We were talking about, J.C. Latham going to your Chargers and how he may not be a great fit there. And Tej, you also highlighted as one of your big surprises that, J.C. Latham went over Olufashano, who's one of those more classic, left tackles. So Arjun, I want to get first just like a short, brief scouting report of kind of J.C. Latham outside of context. And then Tej, move to you where we're talking about kind of your surprise there.
Yeah, so I mean, Latham played right tackle at Bama pretty much his whole career. I think he was considered to be like the strongest tackle in the class. So he's probably the guy, like you consider like a road grader or someone who's going to improve your run game right away, like he's the guy I think I would go to for that. I think I'm not going to use a 1 game sample size to evaluate him, but like looking back at that Michigan Alabama game, I thought he struggled a little bit in pass pro, especially against some of those stunts and twists that Michigan ran. But that was the offensive line in general there. So I think he'll improve them, especially in the run game. He's going to go to Bill Callahan, who's probably going to make him, an all-pro or a Pro Bowl at some point. But I am curious if they're going to move him over to left tackle, because that's where they have like their hole after cutting Andre Dillard, right?
Yeah, no, I mean that's a lot of good points. Like I think when you look at Latham, and even going into some of the data we have from StatsBomb, like he had the longest average length of engagement of any tackle in this class. So he's someone who will sustain his block for a while. He also had the lowest tackle rate allowed in the run game. So like you mentioned with Bill Callahan, like I think those might be things that you want out of your tackles. I think the Browns were really good at kind of those two things these past couple of years, where like with that Nick Chubb run game, like you rarely saw missed blocks, and Nick Chubb would take advantage of those. You often saw, especially in Baker's best year in 2020, like the Browns offensive line would hold up a lot, especially when he's doing a lot of play action. So like maybe that's kind of the vision that they see with this Latham pick. But it did surprise me just because he had an EDP of 17. So he was projected to go a little bit after the middle of the first round. Fashanu was 13.5. So a couple picks earlier, he was the offensive tackle too. And he was more of a well-rounded tackle. But yeah, I mean, I do trust kind of what the Titans are doing from an offensive line perspective. Like I think that their scouting is probably pretty good when it comes to this stuff. And Rand Carthon, showed a strong investment in offensive line last year, and he's kind of continuing that this year with this pick as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so we talk about, they go into these road graders, they invest into Peter Skoronski a year or two ago. And so they've invested a lot kind of in this offense, both at all parts of. They have DeAndre Hopkins, you pay a Calvin Ridley, you obviously pick up 2 quarterbacks in past drafts with Levis and Willis. Ben, tell us about some of the fantasy aspects of this. Like, should we be looking at a Calvin Ridley now in that kind of new system? Does Tajay Spears, my guy from Tulane, all of a sudden become an option in fantasy? What's kind of the outlook now from this Titans team?
Yeah, I think it's really muddy, to be honest with you, and I think we do need to understand exactly what Will Levis is capable of at the NFL level. I think in some ways we got a taste of it, but I don't know if we got the whole piece of the pie, I would say, or the whole kit and caboodle. And like, I'm as big of a Tajay Spear guy as anybody in this room, except for maybe Sam out there. But like there's like, I think at every single fantasy position there's like a 1A and a 1B option, to the point where they could go in either direction. Obviously getting Tony Pollard in that backfield, like it's not going to really free up a ton of space for Tajay Spears. So I do like the Calvin Ridley move for them to kind of get a bona fide number 1 wide receiver, but I think it's still really muddied with like Nick Westbrook-Akun, as well as, DeAndre Hopkins in the fold. They have, Chidobe Okonaway as well at the tight end.
What? Awuzie.
Yeah. That's what you got to be on for, man. So, but like, I still think like they are, like 3rd or 4th in the AFC South, and I just don't know if I have enough confidence in Will Levis, I would say, to like really bring about like a top 10 offense. And I think because of that and the way in which this ball is probably going to be distributed, I don't see a ton of like marquee fantasy talent happening, I would say, in Tennessee this season.
Sure. And so as we kind of move from this biggest surprises phase to the biggest winners phase, I do want to mention one surprise that came up for me, at least, and it's kind of part and parcel to the greater trend of the defensive players going later. But all those cornerbacks that we thought, maybe 2 or 3 maybe off the board by like 17, if not 20, all kind of slide down, which leads to the hometown Detroit Lions trading up. Terrion Arnold, all of a sudden he's on the mic. The people of Detroit are rowdy. We're all watching and excited. Obviously, Tej, you came into today saying that corner was probably a position of need. Big surprise for you, big winner perhaps. What's kind of your view on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the Lions would have traded out, I think, of 29, probably out of the first round if the draft wasn't being hosted in Detroit. I do think that the reaction of the crowd probably made it worth it for the Fords, for Brad Holmes to end up making that pick, going up, jumping the Packers and taking Terry Arnold there. And I mean, you look at Arnold, like he was someone who was supposed to go a decent amount higher than he ended up going. I do think that Nick Saban made a really interesting point on his show, talking about how he thinks that Kool-Aid McKinstry is like a 1A compared to Terry Arnold. So maybe there's a little bit of gap between how scouts see Arnold versus kind of the general consensus on him. But like Arnold, when targeted last year, was really, really good, at preventing successful plays, at preventing explosive plays. I think when you looked at the Lions cornerback room last year, they had the most struggle of anyone in the league at guarding wide receiver ones. So you want to try to take someone at that position that is going to try to be able to give you a chance to do that. It's going to be a steep learning curve for him. He's going to have some tough competition both in the NFC North and outside of that. But if he can develop to be someone who can at least slow down some of the big, like Mike Evans, massive playoff game, Puka Nacua had a massive playoff game. Justin Jefferson, even coming back from injury, did really well against the Lions. Like I think they just really need to try to stop the bleeding there, and hopefully he can provide something like that. Like obviously Brad Holmes is someone who's very confident in his scouting ability. He's going to try to trade up. Sometimes it doesn't work out, like with the Jameson Williams pick. Sometimes it works. His scouting works out really well with the Sam Laporta, Brian Branch picks last year. So it's always going to be a mixed bag of those. And I think if this one falls in line with more of the latter, it could be really successful for the Lions.
Yeah. So moving from a corner, the Lions, moving into a big winner bin. I believe you had the Eagles as a big winner this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think as far as like teams letting the draft come to them, and very much like not only filling a position of need for a team, premium position, getting the best guy at that position from everything that I've been looking at the cornerback position, like getting Quinion Mitchell at 22 overall, like it's just something that Howie Roseman seems to do year in and year out. And I think it's like a sound team building approach, a strategy, is to kind of let things unfold before you and then really just like hone in on the cracks that have happened because of the mistakes of the people that have drafted before you. And I think that's what he did once again. And it's just like a continuous thing. And there's a reason why, they're going to be in the running for the NFC, division championship every single year now, going to be favorites once again. It's because of moves like this. And I very much think he is going to plug and fill a need for a legitimate contender and could probably be, one of the more key players to an actual successful team coming out of this draft of anybody, I would say, that was picked in the first round.
For sure. And you look at just kind of the value that we got. I mean, we talked about them kind of sliding. There was a lot of teams that got involved in trades. You look at the Jaguars, you look at the Jets. We're all analytics guys up here, and we all advocate for kind of understanding the chart. And so walk me through kind of the thought process, Arjun, of you're the Jaguars and you trade back to get a Brian Thomas Jr. And what does that value kind of reap for them later? What do you expect them to do with it? Obviously, they also get a weapon for Trevor Lawrence, having had Calvin Ridley outgo. What's kind of next for the Jags? And is analytics kind of a winner of this draft? We see 6 quarterbacks go. We see lots of very few non-premium position players go, and we see some trades back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I know Trent Baalke, he doesn't get as a great of a rep, I think, in like the public sphere, but in back-to-back drafts now, he's like traded back in the first round and still addressed a position of need. I think coming into the draft, I thought they were going to go get a corner. They cut Darius Williams. I know they signed Ronald Darby, but like really is a 2-year deal. That's probably a 1-year deal, and that's in some sense. So like they need a long-term guy. And so up to that point at pick 17, there had been no corners off the board. So I'm like, okay, they probably traded back because they don't think anyone from 17 to the Eagles were going to take a corner. And so when Quinion Mitchell went off the board, I'm like, okay, they still have Terry and Arnold, but then, Brian Thomas is still there. And I think, some of the value, I don't have the trade chart or the, whatever value they got, even though I think it was a really good deal for them, right?
The Vikings one was a good deal.
Because it was 2025, 3rd and 4th.
Yeah, they got like an equivalent of like a second round pick.
So that's an interesting one because like we've had so many discussions about like discounting future picks, and I don't know what Trent Baalke's like job security is. Like I don't know if Jacksonville misses the playoffs this year, like it could be wraps. But like knowing that Minnesota has like a really bad left tail, especially starting a rookie quarterback like JJ, who youngest quarterback in the draft, could have a really bad transition period. That third round pick could be extremely high. And so I really like, them trying to get future picks where it could be higher than where the Vikings were picking this year. So from that perspective, again, without seeing the charts, like I really like the process there. And like, I think they probably wanted a corner or receiver. And I thought receiver is a better pick than corner because they need to try to maximize this Lawrence rookie deal, which I don't think they've done a great job of.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point, right? Like we always talk about how teams always are overconfident in both how they're going to perform next year and how much they're going to need those future picks. And I think the Jaguars took advantage of both of that in this trade, where you picking up a future third and a future fourth is huge. That's going to give you so much flexibility in the draft next year. With if you do want to package those and move up, you can do that, and those are kind of just extra picks that you ended up getting, and you're still taking a premium position with the trade back of a player that was considered either the wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 in this class from a consensus perspective. Like I think it was a really good move, from them. I also think that your Jets also did like something very similar where they traded back, they picked up about an early fourth in value, and then they took a premium position at a position where there's a high chance that they don't get a full 17 games out of both of their starting tackles right now. So like I think like that's another winner where like they use the trade charts to their advantage. They took a premium position when they moved back, and they still got good value out of all of that.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I was gonna say like another thing, like I think people, maybe people don't like the analytics community because we're like always trade back, but like those picks that they got the third and the fourth, like that's what you can use to get a L'Jarius Sneed. That's what you can use to improve your roster. Now they're probably gonna have paid Lawrence by this time next year, where they're probably not gonna have money to like trade and sign to a future extension. But like if someone just comes up on the market as someone they could trade for, like even Brandon Cooks went for a fifth, Amari Cooper went for a fifth, Jerry Jeudy went for something closer to like a day 2 value when the net value of everything. Like those picks in the future you can use to get established players. It doesn't have to be a rookie. So that's also something where like I think the Jags did well for, and hopefully Baalke's around to use those picks. And I mean I love the Brian Thomas pick for them as well.
Yeah, and I think Ben, you obviously were on the other side of these trades. From a process point of view, I mean, you have a quarterback, but I think we all kind of agree that if you think that's a good quarterback, and if your process says like, we won't be in a position where we have to try to scramble for a quarterback anymore, or play a Josh Dobbs in the middle of the year, or pick people up like that. What's kind of the process moving forward now that you've kind of pushed all your chips into the center?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we saw it, I would say, with the move up to 17, is like they're going to continue to push as hard as possible. They might not have any picks in 2025 here pretty soon, basically when this comes down to. But I think like overall, like there is a window and an expectation that I think the Vikings need to prove to certain players that they want to win, and they're wanting to win now. And I think they are doing that, and they are in some ways maybe mortgaging the future from a draft pick standpoint to do that. We have seen other teams do that. It hasn't necessarily worked out that well. Could be a fun ride, but it definitely makes me nervous as well. So.
Yeah, and I think kind of moving into there's teams that can trade back, but then you have that position of need, and like my New Orleans Saints never trade back, and but today it worked out. They got a player kind of dead on, spot on EDP, who people look at as a good tackle that can probably swing the guard. There's questions about their guard depth and tackle depth, and he probably slots into a starting tackle position. And say Ryan Ramczyk comes back, he swings to the left tackle, or he fills in at guard, and he's a useful player. I think another pick that we all liked in this kind of same vein was the Steelers with Troy Fautanu. Tej, what were your kind of thoughts on that pick?
Yeah, I mean it is just classic Steelers, like really letting everything come to them. I think Omar Khan did a good job here where he got taken a little bit after his expected draft position. So they gained a little bit of value there. And like he's just such a good tackle prospect, especially when you look at some of his data, and like what he can provide you. Like I think he's done a really good job of showing that he's highly athletic. He had a 94th percentile predictive athleticism score. He was someone who didn't allow pressures at that high of a rate, protecting for Michael Penix. Was able to someone that they could run behind with Dylan Johnson. Like I think that he did a good job of playing at Washington last year. Someone our scout said was pretty high end agility, pretty high flexibility and play speed. So like I think the Steelers did a great job of addressing a need and also taking someone who can have that flexibility that, like you mentioned, Arjun, of playing as guard or tackle depending on where they have the opening.
I don't know if you'd be able to look it up. Would he be playing left tackle for the Steelers? Because I think I saw something where like he's going to be right, and then Broderick Jones is going to move back to left, which is where he played at Georgia.
Yeah, so Arlads has it projected as Fatanu is at right tackle and Jones is at left tackle.
So like, okay, I just like don't understand why they would do that. like why? Like Fatanu played left in college, and I know Broderick played left in college as well, but he's had a full season, and he didn't play the full season at right, but like he's had reps, he's played in games at right tackle, and now you're gonna switch both of them. Like,
yeah,
it's like I love the pick. I think obviously they have a need at tackle, but like switching him to right, like I just like I don't understand why they wouldn't play at their natural position.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think he was obviously in the mix for the Saints as well at the time. Obviously, Sideslow gets picked up by the Steelers, but a lot of people wanted to move him to guard. And I think back to the comment about swing linemen, that was kind of the name of the game of kind of past the Joe Alts and to a point past the Shawnus of like these guys were all kind of swing linemen, which was kind of weird for any given first round draft, but they were all very talented. And so you see that, and obviously whether he does play right or left, they've now kind of solidified those two premium positions while they're trying to figure out the quarterback position. So Ben, I wanted to ask you, now they have two tackles. What does this mean for a potential Russell Wilson, Justin Fields battle?
I mean, I do agree with you. I think to me, and I think it was Jeff Schwartz who tweeted this in like the last couple of days. I'm looking for the tweet basically, but I think he's very much, helped write like the Sloan Analytics paper on, tackle depth and like some things with like the pass protection and how you can use tracking data, and very much has like helped, Eric Tej and everyone kind of like understand, offensive line play. And he actually doesn't really think it's a benefit to have a guy that can play like multiple positions along the offensive line. And it's like something that he thinks probably is overvalued and maybe like can actually be a little bit of a hindrance to a guy developing correctly at the NFL level. And I think like that's maybe my concern with a couple of these topics is like, I'm very much not the, not the purveyor of like offensive line projection and how these prospects are going to fit in. But if, somebody that I think very highly of is saying some of those things, I think it at least carries weight to be studied a little bit more. But I think overall, like I from the Steelers standpoint, like it hasn't changed my outlook that I would expect Justin Fields to be started by like week 4. I do think there's just like something within what Mike Tomlin wants to do offensively that Justin Fields can be successful at a lot more than Russell Wilson will, especially with like the pieces that they have around him for sure.
For sure. And guys, we've crossed the 120 hour. We're into, this is officially Sumer Sports After Dark. We have 3,000 plus viewers tonight. So thank you everyone out there. We've talked about some of the best stuff. Let's close it out. We're supported here by Underdog. Use promo code SUMER for 100% match for up to $100. There's a lot of things that have kind of shaken out, a lot of new purviews, clearer eyes on how the season may go. I'll start it off with, a great fantasy play, I think, is checking out Xavier Worthy. A lot of stuff has been going on that Chiefs locker room in the city of Dallas on interstates that need not be talked about, but Xavier Worthy may be a new option given the speed, given developing with Mahomes, Texas guy also. It'll be interesting to see what he can do in fantasy, and I think he may be someone who may be able to slide into a good position to make a lot of plays as a rookie. So Tej, I want to ask you, like, and just kind of going down the line, what's one move that was made today that kind of can give us a clear view on someone who may be impactful in the fantasy game?
Yeah, I mean, the Xavier Worthy one I think is huge, like you mentioned. Like anyone who gets put on the Chiefs, like instantly has their value rise, which is really good for him. From a fantasy perspective, I think Malik Neighbors, as where he was pre-draft to now, probably took a little bit of a hit because there's going to be a little bit of a target share competition for the Giants. I think that they've invested a lot in a lot of different or the same type of receiver like over and over, but like there's so many of them that the target shares are going to be spread out there. And then like we still are so uncertain about what their quarterback play is going to look like next year, whether we get which Daniel Jones we get, whether we get the 1 year where he played at a decent level or the kind of the other career Daniel Jones. So like I think it's going to be harder for him to get going from day one. I think that, Arjun and I have talked about this before. Like there were analytical models in the league that had Neighbors over Harrison Jr. Depending on kind of like the inputs to your models. But like, I think Marvin Harrison is definitely a tier above thrown to him, and he's going to be the clear wide receiver one in that offense where they don't really have much other competition at wide receiver, while Neighbors has probably dropped a little bit because of his situation.
For sure. Ben, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think personally Marvin Harrison is going to crush this season. I think in a lot of ways, like he was, to me, clearly ahead of Malik Neighbors from a prospect standpoint. I think the target share opportunity that he has, going up against guys like Greg Dortch, Chris Wilson, like there's just not a lot there, right? And if you think the Cardinals are going to be somewhat bad, like that creates more passing game volume in general for Marvin Harrison. So I think it's obvious, but I think I think there's probably, especially in like dynasty drafts, that Marvin Harrison should probably be like the consensus number one overall selection heading out of this. I know it was pretty much a lock that he was going to Arizona if they stayed there, but I think now that it's happened, and we'll see what they do in the next couple rounds. But to me, like there's not a lot of competition there, and they're going to be throwing the football a lot. And I think Marvin Harrison could very much have that rookie breakout that a lot of people are projecting.
Yeah, I got to agree, Ben. With Alex here, no Dortch slander. That's a guy I played against. Can confirm, at least to the Tulane defensive backfield. He was very terrifying. Let's close it out with you, Arjun. Who, as the special guest, what's a clearer picture you got from today in terms of fantasy?
Yeah, it's easy. Just don't draft Justin Herbert in any league.
It's going to be running the ball.
Yeah, Chargers are looking to establish the run. They're going to be running the ball. I mean, and even if they don't run the ball, I mean, I don't know who Justin Herbert's going to throw to at this point. Like, maybe they draft someone on day two. Maybe they're probably not going to trade for anyone, but like, they're just like, I don't see any viable option for him being like a top 12 or top 14 guy. He just doesn't have weapons to throw to right now. And just the way they've kind of approached the offseason, signing 2 running backs, signing 0 receivers, drafting Alts in the first, I think it all signals towards a pretty run-heavy approach like Harbaugh had at Michigan.
Yeah. I mean, we thought that they were going to take an offensive lineman. I think we've been talking about that for a couple of weeks. But like, I guess today did confirm, like, all right, maybe I'm going to talk myself into taking Josh Palmer a bunch in fantasy because like who else is going to get targets, right? Like when I ran my initial target share model, he's top 5 in the league in target share, just from like kind of default. So it's like, yeah, maybe Josh Palmer is really the biggest winner of tonight, just because like he's going to be getting all the targets for the Chargers this next year.
For sure. And so the great news about the draft, especially round 1, is if you're like Arjun and you're kind of down in the dumps about something happening, there's always day 2 and day 3. And even better news is that Sumer Sports, partnering with Underdog, of course, will be bringing you more content, more news, more notes, more analysis, more fantasy, more best ball, more betting tips. We're bringing it all, maybe not this late, but certainly close, especially tomorrow. So tune in to all of our Twitters. Tune in to @Sumer Sports, YouTube, Twitter. Check us out everywhere. We're working on short form content. I know we're going to work on our Instagram page coming up here shortly. There's going to be all kinds of cool stuff coming from Sumer Sports. following in the draft in Detroit. All of us will be live. Thank you for joining the Class Play After Dark live in Detroit. Thank you to our special guest,
Thanks,
Arjun
Arjun.
Menon.
Appreciate you coming
Thank
on.
you to Tej Seth. Thank you to Ben Brown, Sam Bruchhaus. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you tomorrow for day 2 of the draft.